My father looked me straight in the eyes across the dinner table and said, "No matter what you hear tonight, do not open the door." His voice didn't shake, but something in his eyes told me this wasn't a joke. The air felt heavy. My younger brother Seth froze with his fork in midair, while my mother lowered her head as if she already knew what was coming. 10 minutes later, the house fell into an unnatural silence. Then came a knock at the front door, steady, calm, certain, and a voice that sounded exactly like my father said, "Ava, sweetheart, it's me. Open the door." But my father was sitting right beside me. If this already sent chills down your spine, make sure you subscribe right now and tell me in the comments what country you're watching from so we can continue this story together. My name is Ava Hale. I am 26 years old, and after months of burnout at my job and a painful breakup, I drove back to my childhood home in rural Virginia hoping for comfort. Instead, I stepped into a house that felt nothing like the warm place I grew up in. We live miles away from the nearest town, one road in, surrounded by thick woods that block out most of the sunlight. As soon as I walked in, I noticed every window was covered. The doors had new locks, heavy ones I had never seen before. The security system had cameras inside the house, not just outside. My father, Victor, had always been protective, but this time, it felt different. This wasn't preparation. This was fear. My mother, Nora, greeted me with a forced smile. Her hands trembled when she hugged me. My 15-year-old brother Seth was happy to see me, but he spoke in a whisper like someone might be listening. When I asked why the curtains were all shut, my mother said, "Your father thinks it's safer this way." I tried to laugh it off, but no one else did. At dinner that night, the energy at the table was tight. No music, no phones, just the sound of forks on plates. My father kept glancing at the front door like he was expecting it to move. Seth finally broke the silence and asked, "Dad, are we in danger?" My father didn't answer. He just stared at his plate. I tried to make light conversation about normal things, my old room, the town, the weather, but my mother suddenly put her hand on mine under the table. Her touch was cold. She whispered, "Just listen to him tonight, please." That's when I realized something was very wrong. This wasn't anxiety. This was anticipation, like they were waiting for something they had experienced before. I looked at my father, hoping for some explanation. Instead, he finally spoke in a low, steady voice. "Tonight, you are safe only if you follow one rule. Whatever you hear, whatever you think you recognize, you do not open that door." Seth asked who would be outside, but my father cut him off. "It won't be someone," he said. "It will be something." My mother closed her eyes as if she couldn't bear to hear the words again. My mind raced. Was this a mental breakdown? Was someone stalking us? Were we in some kind of witness protection situation that I never knew about? I wanted to laugh it off, ask if this was some kind of twisted family joke. But when I looked at my father again, I saw something I had never seen in him before. Real fear. He had faced danger in war. He had survived near-death experiences. My father did not scare easily, and tonight, he was terrified. The house grew colder, the lights flickered once, and the woods outside went silent. No crickets, no wind, just silence pressing against the windows from every side. Then came the first sound, a faint echo from somewhere far in the trees, almost like a voice, calling my name. My father stood up slowly from the table and motioned for us to follow him to the living room. He didn't raise his voice or try to frighten us. He spoke with calm authority, the same way he used to when I was a kid and he would teach me survival skills in the backyard. It was the tone of someone who knew what was coming and had been preparing for years. That was what scared me most. He wasn't uncertain. He wasn't guessing. He was waiting. We all gathered around the fireplace where the dim light flickered against the walls. My mother gripped the arm of the couch with both hands. Seth sat on the edge of the chair, his leg bouncing nervously. I stood near my father, my eyes locked on his face. "Dad," I said softly, "you need to tell us what's going on." He nodded as though he had already decided to tell us, but only when the moment was right. He began to speak about his military work, but not in a way I had heard before. Growing up, we were told he worked in communications and intelligence. Tonight, he admitted that was only a partial truth. During his service, he had been part of a recovery team that responded to strange transmissions in remote environments. These weren't normal radio signals. They were voices, human voices, coming from places no human could be. Some were recordings of people who were confirmed dead. Others were exact replicas of living people, speaking phrases they had never said aloud. At first, the military assumed it was an advanced form of psychological warfare. But then the transmissions moved. They weren't tied to physical equipment. They came from trees, rocks, even bodies of water. His team was sent to investigate such a site deep in Virginia, not far from our own property line. In the woods, they heard their own names being called back to them in their own voices. Not distorted, not robotic, perfectly human. My father said that something followed them out of those woods and never returned to where it came from. It didn't travel by sight or scent. It traveled by voice. It mimicked what it heard and used it to get close to people. It could convince children to open a window by using the voice of a parent. It could call a dog by name and make it walk willingly into the trees. It had no physical form that they could see, unless it chose one. Seth laughed nervously, thinking this was some elaborate story. My father looked directly at him and said, "This is why the windows are covered. That is why you have never been allowed to go outside after dark, because it comes at night, and it always knocks first." The wind howled outside, though no storm had been forecast. The sound wasn't natural. It was like the trees were whispering in a low chorus, each one saying something different too quietly to understand. My heart was beating so hard it hurt. I glanced at my mother, and she wouldn't meet my eyes. It was then that I realized this wasn't the first time she had heard this warning. Everything became still. The house, the woods, even the air felt heavy and frozen. My father motioned for silence. That is when we heard it. The knock, 3 slow, deliberate taps against the front door. My entire body tensed. It wasn't loud, but it echoed through the house like it was coming from inside the walls. Then came the voice. "Ava, honey, I'm back. Can you please open the door?" It was my father's voice. The exact tone. The same gentle warmth he used when I was little and cried after a nightmare. But my father was standing next to me, staring straight ahead with a cold expression I had never seen before. Seth stood abruptly. His eyes went wide as he looked from the door to our father. "That's you," he whispered. "No," my father said firmly. "It is not." My mind tried to reason. Maybe it was a prank, a recording, a neighbor playing a joke. But then the voice changed. It softened into my mother's tone. "Ava, please," it cried. "Something's wrong with your father. Let me in." My mother clenched her jaw, tears filling her eyes. My father's voice grew stern. "It knows us. It remembers every word it has ever heard. It will try to earn your trust. It will beg. It will cry. It will scream." He stepped forward. "But it cannot enter unless we let it." The knocking grew louder, then faster, not like a human hand, but something striking the door with increasing anger. The voice outside started calling names. My name, Seth's name. Then it went silent for one breath. What came next froze the blood in my veins. The voice changed into that of a young child. The voice of me, as a little girl, crying for my father to open the door. It wasn't just copying the sound. It was copying the emotion behind it. The fear, the tears, the desperation. It was perfect. Too perfect. That was the moment I stopped questioning whether this was real. I knew, with absolute certainty, that something unearthly was right outside our door, and it wanted me to let it in. My father reached into a locked drawer built into the wall beside the fireplace and pulled out a small silver device, something I had never seen before. It wasn't a weapon, not in the traditional sense, but it looked heavy and precise, like a scanner or disruptor. He placed it on the coffee table and turned to us with a calmness that only made the situation feel worse. Seth asked what it was, and my father explained that the creature outside wasn't just imitating voices, it was actively searching for weaknesses. He believed it could sense hesitation, fear, and emotional attachment through sound frequencies. That was why it used our own voices against us. My mother stepped forward, her voice trembling as she confessed that the first time she encountered it was years ago, during a time when my father had gone missing during a classified mission. She thought she heard him calling from outside one night. He spoke gently, told her he was injured, begged her to open the door, and because she believed he might be dying, she almost did. Just before she could pull the door open, the real Victor arrived home. The moment she realized she had been speaking to something else, something that knew personal details about them, she collapsed in his arms, shaken beyond reason. It had been waiting all these years, learning their patterns, listening to their conversations through the thin walls of the house and the forest that surrounded it. I felt something inside me shift. This wasn't random. It wasn't a sudden haunting or accident. This thing had a history with us, a purpose, and it wasn't going to stop unless we did something. My father said, "Tonight is different. It's stronger. It has learned more. It will not leave without an answer." My mother whispered that the thing wanted to replace someone inside so it could stay permanently. The knocking started again, but this time softer, like fingertips gently tracing the wood as if caressing it. A voice that sounded exactly like my own began speaking from the other side, calmly describing memories from my childhood, my 8th birthday party, the time I fell off a bike, and my father carried me home. Even the song my mother used to sing to me when I was sick. I felt my breath leave my body. This thing had been listening to my life from the shadows. I stepped away from the door, my mind racing. If it could copy voices, maybe it could fool more than just our ears. Maybe it could project illusions through the windows or mimic footsteps in the house. My father confirmed this as if reading my thoughts, saying it was not only a mimic, but a hunter that fed on emotional response. The more unsettled we became, the more it pressed against our sanity until someone finally broke and opened the door. That was its way in. We had to cut its access. No more reacting emotionally. No more speaking when it called. My father handed me the device and said he needed to activate a hidden panic system installed beneath the house years ago after his first encounter with the entity. The system wasn't meant to capture it, only to repel it with high-frequency sound waves that could force it back into the forest temporarily. Temporary was all we needed. He believed that at dawn, the creature lost strength. Our mission wasn't to defeat it. Our mission was to survive until morning. My heart pounded as I followed him toward the basement door. Seth grabbed my arm, begging me not to go. His eyes filled with fear that if I left, I wouldn't come back. My mother stood in the hallway, hands clasped over her mouth, silently praying. Before we reached the basement, the entire house went dark. The lights flickered out one by one. The security cameras went dead. And then the creature spoke again, only this time. Its voice boomed from every wall, every direction, as if the entire house had become its mouth. It said my name slowly, lovingly, promising safety, promising the end of fear, if I would just open the door. My father looked at me and whispered, "This is its final attempt. If we don't move now, it will find another way in." I felt a surge of courage rise within me, not because I wasn't afraid, but because I knew that fear was exactly what it wanted. I tightened my grip on the device, nodded at my father, and stepped into the dark basement. The moment we crossed the threshold, the knocking stopped. The house fell into silence, and for the first time since the night began, I realized we had stopped reacting to it and had finally started fighting back. As my father and I stepped deeper into the basement, the air turned heavier, as though the house itself was pressing down on us. The small emergency lights flickered to life along the floorboards, casting an eerie amber glow on the concrete walls. I could still hear faint echoes of the creature's voice from upstairs, switching rapidly from my mother's cry to my own laughter, to my brother's scared whispers, each one perfect, each one intimate. It wasn't trying to break the door anymore. It was trying to break us. My father moved quickly to the control panel hidden behind a false wall and began entering a long string of codes. I remembered being a child and asking why we were never allowed in the basement. My father had only said it was unsafe. Now I understood. This wasn't a basement. It was a bunker, a last line of defense. As he worked, the creature's voice suddenly grew clearer, closer, as if it had moved from the front door to right above our heads. We heard footsteps pacing across the floorboards directly overhead. Then, without warning, we heard the unmistakable sound of Seth screaming. My father froze. The scream sounded like something out of a nightmare, raw and terrified. And then came the desperate pounding of fists against a wall. "Dad, please," Seth's voice cried out. "It got Mom. Please open the basement door." My entire body went cold. I looked up the stairway, expecting any moment to see Seth burst through the door. But I glanced at the control screen and saw multiple motion sensors triggered inside the house, but nothing showed on the infrared display. My father whispered, "That's not Seth." The creature had stopped wasting time. It was escalating. It knew our greatest fears, losing each other, and it used them like weapons. My father hit the final code. The entire basement shuddered as the infrasound system powered on. A deep vibration pulsed through the floor, not loud, but powerful enough to shake the walls. Upstairs, we heard the creature roar, not like an animal, not like a human, but like a chorus of all the voices it had ever stolen, twisting together into one violent scream. The temperature dropped so fast that my breath came out in white clouds. I felt pressure in my ears, as if we were sinking underwater. My father staggered back, holding his head, but I forced myself to stand strong. The vibrations built in intensity. The creature thrashed against the house, slamming into walls, scraping long claws across the windows, banging with inhuman force at every entry point. It was trying to hold on, trying to resist being pushed back. Suddenly, the control panel began flashing red. The system was overloading. If it failed now, the creature wouldn't just survive, it would break through with more rage than before. I rushed forward and grabbed the stabilizer lever my father had told me to pull, only if things got critical. It was manual override, meaning it would direct maximum power to the repellent system, but risk shutting down the entire house grid indefinitely. My father looked at me, his eyes wide, and nodded once. Without hesitation, I pulled the lever. The house erupted with a low-frequency blast that seemed to shake the very air around us. Upstairs, the creature let out a final scream of rage, a sound so piercing it felt like it went straight through my skull and down my spine. The lights flickered. For a moment, everything went silent. Then, just as suddenly, all noise stopped. The presence was gone. The crushing heaviness in the air lifted. The temperature slowly began to rise. My father exhaled shakily and rested his hand on my shoulder. "You did it," he whispered. But before I could even feel relief, the basement door creaked. I turned toward the stairs. Something stood at the top in the shadows. A figure, human-shaped, completely still. My heart pounded. My father lifted his arm to shield me. The figure stepped forward into the light, revealing my mother, pale and shaking, tears streaming down her face. She whispered, "It's not over." Before we could ask what she meant, she slowly turned her head toward the doorway behind her, where darkness pooled like ink. And from that darkness came my own voice, calling gently, "Ava, you forgot to let me in." In that moment, I realized the truth that changed everything. We hadn't driven it away. We had only weakened it. And now it had chosen its target. Not my father, not my mother, me. The moment I heard my own voice calling from the darkness behind my mother, the air seemed to stop moving. Everything my father had warned us about finally made sense. It wasn't just trying to scare us. It was choosing. It had mimicked all of us, cried through our memories, screamed through our fears, and now it had focused on me, because I was the one it believed it could break. My mother's face was ashen as she stepped fully into the basement light. Her eyes were red-rimmed, not only from fear, but from guilt. The thing had learned our family's patterns and emotions, because at one point, in her loneliness and desperation, she had unknowingly fed it with stories, laughs, and tears, trusting a voice she thought belonged to the man she loved. She whispered, "It doesn't leave when it is pushed away. It stays quiet. It waits." Before we could speak, there was a faint tapping from outside the basement window, A window that was secured, barred, and nearly ground level. We all turned as a figure passed by in the darkness. No footsteps, just movement. The tapping came again, followed by a soft whisper in my voice. "I know you can hear me." The horror was no longer in what it could do, but what it understood. It knew that logic would keep my father strong. It knew guilt would keep my mother obedient. But me, it had studied me my entire life. It knew I was someone who couldn't stand to see my family suffer. It knew I was the one who would sacrifice myself if it meant protecting them. And that was exactly what it wanted. My father rushed upstairs to reinforce the doors, shouting over his shoulder that the system would hold until sunrise. My mother followed, her hands shaking as she clutched a family photo to her chest. Seth clung to me, trembling as he asked, "Ava, if it sounds like you, how do I know it's not already you?" I didn't blame him for asking. In that moment, I wasn't sure who I was anymore either. We gathered in the living room, waiting for dawn, each of us sitting in silence except for the crackling of the fireplace and the occasional flicker of movement outside the windows. Hours stretched endlessly. Sometimes we heard my voice, sometimes my brother's, sometimes a stranger's, but it never tried to break in again. It didn't need to. It had planted itself in our minds. The forest outside was completely still, as though nature itself had frozen to avoid drawing its attention. At the first light of sunrise, the whispers stopped completely. The pressure lifted. The sense of being watched vanished. My father peered through the blinds, and for the first time in years, he exhaled with genuine relief. The creature had retreated. Not gone, but sleeping. He said creatures like that fed on vulnerability and fear. And when morning came, we were no longer at our weakest. But the aftermath did not feel like victory. It felt like survival with a price. My mother sat on the couch, her face buried in her hands, finally releasing all the emotions she had been holding in for years. My father stood at the window, the morning sun casting a line of light across his face. He no longer looked fearful. He looked determined. He told me that what happened here needed to be documented. Not for authorities, not for scientists, but for people like us, families who might hear a familiar voice outside their home one night and think opening the door is an act of love instead of a fatal mistake. Seth asked what we would do now. My father said the house could no longer be our home. The creature had our voices, our memories, our patterns. The land itself was no longer safe. As he spoke, I looked out the window into the forest. For a split second, I saw a figure that looked exactly like me, standing between the trees, watching. It didn't move. It didn't need to. It wanted me to know it was still there, that it was waiting, and that one day, when the right night came, it would call again. We packed our belongings in silence that afternoon, not because we were afraid of speaking, but because some part of us knew speaking too openly, laughing too loudly, or singing too freely might give it more to gather. This wasn't just a haunting. It was a reminder that not everything that speaks with love comes in peace. As we drove away from the house, I looked back for the last time. The door remained closed. The curtains remained drawn. But as we turned the final corner, I heard the faintest echo in the back of my mind. My own voice, soft and calm, whispering my name like a promise. I realized this story was no longer about fear. It was about awareness. Because if it could learn from us, maybe we could learn from it. Maybe surviving wasn't the end. It was only the beginning. And if you are hearing this now, ask yourself one question. If someone knocks on your door tonight, and the voice sounds exactly like someone you love, will you be strong enough not to open it? If this story gripped you, make sure you hit subscribe now and comment where you're watching from, because your support helps me keep uncovering stories the world needs to hear before it's too late.